It's a cartoon. Okay. then I don't feel bad. I thought it was maybe contemporary music, like Paul McCartney or something from my period of contemporarity. Hey, Kevin.
Hey,
nice
Mike.
to see you.
Good to see you.
It seems like it's the time of year for conferences, huh? But as many gaming conferences as there are, I think you've created more business models and more businesses. So we're going to see if we can talk about at least 3 of your businesses in the next 20 minutes. I just want to say one thing. I'm not going to go through Kevin's huge list of accomplishments because God wrote up a huge description on LinkedIn. So you just go to LinkedIn and you can see everything that he's been chairman and CEO of. I do have to ask the question, though, due to my lack of knowledge. So one day you started Water Cooler, which became Kabam.
Yep.
What did you do before that? Were you just like in high school?
I did not drop out. I did actually go to a 4-year university.
A good one.
And finished it.
Hail to California.
Yeah.
Great. Alma mater dear.
Absolutely. Go Bears.
Go Bears.
So I liked math, and so I thought I would go into finance and got a job in investment banking in 2002. And I hated it. It was just I didn't hate it, but I knew it wasn't the thing I wanted to spend the next 10 years doing in my career. So I actually went to a startup, which in 2004, nobody wanted to go work for a startup. So I got to work with this really cool startup called Telefia, doing data analytics, and that was just a very fun job. And the company ended up selling to Nielsen Media
for $500 million.
Yeah, about $500 million. I was employee 250 or something like that, so I got a tiny little amount, but it was kind of the first taste of startup land, and I just loved it. And from
that
there,
was your first long-term capital gain?
That was my first long-term capital gain. That's right. And then from there, I want to do this, but I don't know very much about startups, so I thought, okay, well, maybe I could take my finance background and startup background and go into venture, and was lucky enough to get a job in the venture industry in late 2004 or so. And so I was investing in startups for 2.5 years, and then I went to the firm and I said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a company making sports games on social media. And they wrote me a very, very small check and gave me an office room where four founders basically crammed in one VC office for about 6 months to build our first product, and then we launched it. And so that was the birth of Water Cooler in 2007 or so.
And when did you change the name and why to Kabam?
We started Water Cooler making games that were ad monetized. So we basically made a bunch of games, and we thought, okay, we're going to make our business model will be we'll run a bunch of ads. And we partnered with CBS Sports and some colleges and a few other things to try to sell ads and create more engagement and sponsorship. And it was 2000. What was it? It was 2007, which was a good time to start doing that. But in 2008 came around, Lehman Brothers blew up, and just the ad business model wasn't working in terms of selling ads. And I thought, we actually have a bunch of gaming companies that are buying our ads. And so it was kind of the first thought that, maybe you can make a game that, back then we didn't know what to call it, but eventually turned into what we all now call free to play. And I thought, okay, well, there's this company called Zynga, it's buying a lot of ads, and it's clear that there's something going on here. Let's try to figure this out. And so we started making games that have microtransactions and a free-to-play business model, and that took off. And when we were making those types of games, we decided that we would change our name from Water Cooler, which was much more about sports and talking about sports around the water cooler and playing games around that, like March Madness, to then things like Kingdoms of Camelot or Marvel Contest of Champions. And then so we changed the name to Kabam and just fully embraced gaming as kind of the thing.
So I want to talk a little bit about Kabam long term, the switch to mobile, your exit. But let me ask you this. I know that there were some hard days in there after the Water Cooler name and before the Kabam sale of $800, $900 million to 2 entities. I always respected you, even though I didn't know you back then, that you had the chutzpah, I wanted to use a different word, of course, to lay people off. And here are people in this audience who either have done it or are going to have to do it or will be laid off. And I just wonder if you'd like just talk a tiny bit about that, how you made those decisions, how, because it seems like you were willing to consider that rationally more than all the other game executives I know.
Well, I'll start by sharing that I don't tell this story very much because I'm not, obviously, a little embarrassing, but I was actually laid off from my first job. So in investment banking, it's just not a great time to be doing investment banking back then, and there was a lot of downsides. So I was kind of on the receiving end of it in my very first job coming out of college. And so that experience stuck with me in terms of how that was done. And so it was an incredibly hard decision to make at Kabam to go through layoffs, but I always wanted to do it with more compassion and really focus on the people side. But I think having gone through it and kind of coming out the other side and thinking, yeah, it's not that bad, it's not the end of the world, I just want to do it, if we ever do it at Kabam, we're going to do it better. And we ended up doing some layoffs at Kabam, as we all know in the game industry, you launch a game product, it doesn't work out. Hopefully you can move that team to a new project, but that doesn't always line up, right? So yeah, we made hard decisions, and it's we always took a look at the game industry evolves the free-to-play game industry evolves so fast from Facebook HTML type of games to Facebook Flash games to 2.5D isometric sort of or early 3D stuff on Facebook and browser-based games, and then of course iOS games and iOS and Android games. The industry was constantly in flux in the first really decade of free to play, and so skill sets didn't match. You had a team that made a great HTML game on Facebook, but now needed we're trying to make an iOS game, and do the skill sets match on the technical side? Do they match on the design side or the creative and art side? So we always try to make decisions that were right for the business, and just say, hey, we're not going to keep dancing around the elephant in the room. We're just going to go tackle it head on, but let's figure out how to do it with compassion and try to let people know and try to find the right projects. But if we have to, we're going to make some tough decisions.
I wonder if you ever had anybody come back.
We did.
That wouldn't happen if you hadn't treated them well.
Yeah, I think actually the thing I'm probably most proud of between GenG and Forte, it was all today between those two companies, something like 200 employees, and I would say majority are from, maybe not majority, but a very good chunk is Kabam folks, including some that were affected by some layoffs. So
you saved yourself a bunch of headhunter fees, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go on and talk briefly about GenG and esports, and then we're going to talk about your most recent company, Forte, which I think there's a lot to learn about. Let me just ask you one last Kabam question. You guys had a very good exit, and there haven't been that many very good exits. There's been some public exits, some of which have not turned out to be very good. Are there one or two things that happened 2, 3, whatever, 1 year before the sale that you go like, these two decisions made it possible for me to sell most to Kabam?
The probably the biggest thing that led to a successful outcome for us was us collectively as a company putting a stake in the ground around our biggest game ever at that time, called Marvel Contest of Champions, and just said, we're going to grow this game. This game is going to be a decade-long franchise for us, and we're going to grow this game in a really healthy way for at least 3 years. And so by the time we actually sold, when we had offers to buy the company, that game was still growing, and it was about 3 years in. And so I think, these days, you can have one game like a Fortnite that just changes the game, changes everything for a company, for a whole industry, really. But it's all about how enduring is a franchise, right? So you can sort of count the number of franchises that matter for Activision or EA on your hands, on your fingers, basically, and you only need 1 or 2 of them to really massively change the outcome for the value creation for a company. So I think I think the challenge for all of us in the game industry is how do we create these enduring franchises? How do we create things that can be 10 or 20-year type of experiences for a group of players? Because those are the things that create a ton of value all around. And I think it was when we got off of the content sort of new game launch treadmill and just said, nope, we're gonna go even further into this idea of a live service and just make this one game be an enduring game for as long as we possibly can. That just changed the whole, that led to a very successful outcome.
Yeah, the market is finally available for the devs that have wanted to do that forever.
Yeah,
that want
that's
to have the ability to run a game and iterate it and so on.
And connect directly with your players and so forth. It's a great time to be making games right now.
So no more Kabam, though I might ask you for $1 million later. No, I'm just kidding. Because you've given all your money away to the University of California, which I think is worth mentioning to everybody. You and your wife have both been very generous, as has the company, to the University of California at Berkeley. So as a former Bear, I thank you for that. But that's enough on Kabam. So GenG, how'd you get turned on to esports? You an esports player? You League of Legending at night? And what is GenG? How many, little consumer research here. How many people know GenG? Okay, thank God. Huh? Well, I mean, Jesus. If not this audience, who?
Yeah.
Tell us about GenG. How'd you think to do it? What are you doing? You're not just one game. You're not just one team.
Yeah, well, it started at Kabam being really fascinated with esports. So I think if you've been in the free-to-play industry for a while, you've thought about League of Legends and why is this thing just this juggernaut, right? And so, of course, when you look at League of Legends, you can't just look at the game itself. You have to look at what's happening on Twitch. You have to look at all the events and the stadiums that they sell out. And so it's this broader phenomenon. So we started looking at that and again with this concept of how do you make something last for 10 years or much longer. And esports is one of those vectors. And I think we're still at the kind of beginning phases of of defining esports and understanding it and really coupling kind of media and influencers and personalities with games and what does that all look like? And I just find that endlessly fascinating. And so when League of Legends as well as Blizzard was starting to franchise ownership within those leagues, I thought, wow, this is going to be one of the major structural changes in the industry that could take it to the next level. And I just think that over the next 10, 20 years, this broadly speaking, this concept of esports, of events, of media, of gameplay, and communities kind of coming around these enduring multi-year, multi-decade type of experiences. I think we're just in the beginning phases of that. And not everything needs to be as big as League of Legends. You can have things like Rocket League and other things that are just fantastic, incredible communities at a much smaller scale that are probably going to run for a very, very long time. And that I think is just fascinating. So we started GenG with this idea that one of the ideas, so as I was thinking about that and after Kabam, I said, well, the gaming industry is so worldwide, why is there not an esports team that is much more global in its composition of players and the way that it competes and the way that it sort of engages with media and events? And so that was kind of the idea of GenG, was that in Asia, in China, and Korea, you just had some of these fascinating early trends of what was happening in esports and some of the players being imported into the US market for League of Legends and so forth, coming from those regions. And I just thought, what if we just mix it all up and create GenG as kind of a global, but more specifically kind of East and West esports organization? And that was kind of the founding idea. And we're still early innings, but it's a lot of fun. And we just announced partnering up with Dennis Wong, who's one of the co-owners with Steve Ballmer for the Clippers, to focus on some really interesting new opportunities, as well as with Will Smith and Kaseke Honda to really focus on more entertainment and media aspects. And so I'm excited for the next phase of that. And we're all figuring it out in the industry together.
You've gotten too good at this. You want me to get to Forte, and you're gonna get me there no matter what. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of Ellen or something. Just quickly tell us, and then we will go on to Forte. So you've got the team in Seoul, the Overwatch team in Seoul.
Yep.
Whose name? Are they all called GenG everywhere? Or?
No, so for Overwatch, there's every team has a distinct brand from the endemic brand, let's call it. So in Seoul, our Overwatch team is called Seoul Dynasty, and that's based in Seoul. And then we actually partnered with Samsung. We did this very complicated deal with Samsung to transform that League of Legends team into eventually what's now the GenG League of Legends team. That team had won 2 world championships, and we had just a fascinating organization and history there that we were excited by. And then we have a mobile team competing in Clash Royale in Shanghai, and then Apex Legends and Fortnite and a few others here in Los Angeles.
Excellent. Okay. And now you have another company, somewhat related to gaming, but from the little bit I've read and you've told me, a much bigger platform that you're on top of. So tell us about Forte, and tell us about, when you tell us about Forte, we're going to need definitions for about all the nouns that you use in that sentence, okay?
Okay. So esports, one fascinating vector in the gaming industry, and I'd still be doing that if it wasn't for this crazy thing that's starting to happen in the blockchain ecosphere. So going back to the early Kabam days where we talked about this idea of free-to-play. Free-to-play is really, what fascinated me about it at the time was that it was kind of a new technology first. So we didn't call it cloud computing, back then, but it's essentially what it's turned out to be now, which is cloud computing, where the game state is sitting in a server somewhere, right? So instead of buying a CD and putting it into your Xbox and sort of saving your game on your Xbox or your PC, that everything would happen on the server, and then what's pushed to the client for the user or the player is really just kind of some information and of course the graphics and whatever are happening on the client side. And of course that's rapidly changing with Stadia as well. But anyway, that was a technology that enabled free-to-play gaming, right? So it's this idea that you put the game in the cloud, people could connect to that game, and then you could that way you can provide the game for free. So it's kind of you can start playing for free, and then you could buy things over time. We're all pretty familiar with that business model now. But back in 2007, 2008, this was a pretty radical concept still, and it was really kind of the coupling of this new technology with this new business model that in the venture industry, as I'd been doing a lot of work and research, when those two things come together is when just explosive innovation, explosive economic value creation kind of happens. And what I love about the gaming industry is that we're at the forefront a lot of times of these new technologies and business models, right? So I'm old enough now, sadly, that I grew up playing arcade games where you put a quarter in and you play a game of Street Fighter or Pac-Man or whatever, and I'm sure all of us remember that, but that was kind of, you had this dedicated piece of hardware, and then the business model was you put in quarters, right? To what happened with PC and console games, where you go to the store and you buy it in a box, to be able to download it on Steam or whatever, to free to play, to all these innovations that happen with kind of new technology, new business models, kind of syncing together in the gaming industry, and I'm just fascinated by that. So Forte. What's happening right now is that I think there's this radical new technology with blockchain that we're all still, blockchain has a lot of different things, from the cryptography to kind of decentralized computing to trustlessness, immutability, a lot of different aspects of the technology kind of coming together. And that's fascinating. We go super deep into all those nouns, into what those mean. But the aspect of it that I think is not, we're just starting to scratch the surface, is the new business model around it, which is in some ways a change on 400 years of how we've organized economic activity. So we've had this idea of corporations now for hundreds of years. But in blockchain, there's this new economic model, and you'll hear the word decentralized sort of being thrown around a lot. But it's this idea that you don't have a corporation creating kind of this new technology and organizing you know, what's happening with the technology and the network that's being built on top of it. You have a community, and that community is tied together through open source software and through a token that generates value. And of course, you have things like Ethereum and other things that are worth tens of billions of dollars of value. But it's this idea that no one platform can control it, that you're not trying to create a monopoly on a space and then extract rents, over time as you're trying to go public or make your next quarter, but that there's this, there's this community around open source, which of course open source isn't new in and of itself, but open source plus cryptography plus tokens and economic models kind of all flowing together leads to this new thing that we call token economic business models. And so the idea behind Forte is how do we apply this new technology and this new business model to where the gaming industry and really just interactive entertainment is going, I think, in the next 10 years. I think it's going to be one of those really foundational changes. And I think the gaming industry, and funny enough, now in the crypto industry, there's a lot of thinking that the gaming industry will probably pioneer a lot of the first models for real usage of blockchain technology. And so that's what I'm so excited to be working on today at Forte.
So you guys are building a platform that will allow people to do these things. You're using blockchain to provide administration and security for the people that are participating in the platform. Are you using somebody else's coin, or are you making your own coin?
So what we're not trying to do is be a underlying so in the crypto industry, we kind of talk about protocol layers. So much like most developers don't have to think about how TCP/IP works, you're building your game on top of something that, a bunch of things that eventually uses TCP/IP. But developers don't really think about that anymore because there's all these layers that sit in between. And so we're not trying to be TCP/IP or kind of like foundational stuff. So there's things like what Ethereum does, what EOS does, or Tron or others do that we're not trying to compete with that at all. But what we are trying to do is say, how does a game developer who's thinking about entertaining and creating communities and connecting players with content and experiences, how can they put something, start to create digital assets that their players can truly own and transact and create economic value, and not have to think about all this crazy consensus and solidity and smart contracts and the immutability of what's happening on the blockchain, but they just want to put this thing into their game that lets their players get really excited about being able to own something, being able to mix those things up or remix those things with other players, trade them, combine them, craft them, and put that into the game without having to worry about all the really hard technology. So that's what we're trying to do at Forte. And probably the most exciting thing is we're able to kind of give money away for developers to experiment with this technology. So we've partnered with Ripple, who does not have their own smart contract platform. Their view is they're excited. Right now, they're trying to say anybody that has U.S. dollars and peso, or U.S. dollars who wants to get into pesos, they're going to try to be the best solution to facilitate that sort of transaction. But we went to them and we said, what happens if you have Game A and they have their own tokens, and Game B they have their own tokens, and Game C they have their own tokens, and these are all bigger and bigger economies, and people are trying to move in between these assets and currencies. What would a world like that look like? And they just got super excited about it. And so we believe in a world where there's going to be multiple different types of blockchains, multiple different currencies. A user's not going to have to think about that. The beautiful thing about the game world is that you have some games now. In one game there'll be 7 currencies. In a
is that right?
Itself. Yeah, sure. At Kabam we made some of our games had I think 7 currencies is the most. So the idea is that you as a user, you don't have to think about like what chain is this and how does the technology work. What do I have to do to use this thing? You're just thinking it's a currency that I own, and I want to do something with it. I want to do something with another player, and you can use it. And that's ultimately what we're trying to build to make it easy for developers and for users to get to that place as fast as possible.
Could this sort of facilitation of virtual goods create something so radical as virtual goods, the same virtual good over many different games?
Potentially. I think I think we talk a lot about that, or a lot of discussion that's happened around that in the blockchain industry, and I just think that's hard. I think when having made a few different games at Kabam, you make a game and it's your own world, and you design something within that experience, and the idea that you're going to figure out how players or anybody else takes something that's designed in a totally different space and put it into your game that you've lovingly crafted, I don't think we're going to be there just yet. I think in 5 to 10 years, after there's a bunch of different games and different economies and tokens and assets that players own, and they're asking, hey, I own this thing, I want to use it somewhere else, somebody's going to design a game from the ground up to bring all those assets into it. But I think in the next several years, it's really going to be about something that somebody lovingly crafts, and their players in that community can really own that asset and trade that asset and really do the things that we've seen, starting with Ultima Online and progressing through gold farming at World of Warcraft to all sorts of things that are happening in EVE Online to MView to Second Life to all these other things that we've just seen kind of really interesting peer-to-peer sort of communities that are emerging, and that's perfect for blockchain technology and the business model that's happening right now.
You know this, but most people will be surprised. Second Life's quite a business.
Yeah.
It's a real thriving. Linden Lab's a big, profitable company. So you're going to be spending a lot more time with technology than with content going forward.
As with all things, we're building one of our own games too to make sure we dog food and understand this tech. But yeah, I think my days of, I think one of the key reasons for selling Kabam was feeling like I built a lot of the games that I wanted to build, and I'm more interested now to kind of help enable other builders and developers and creators to experiment with more technology easier. So I kind of maybe have one more game in me, but mostly focus on building technology these days.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.